So as part of your assessment, you're also determining whether or not there's a threat.
I'm determining whether or not I need to alert somebody to something that could potentially be a threat.
And in this situation, you didn't make that alert. Is that fair?
That is correct. There wasn't any information that led me to believe there would be a reason to alert somebody else.
And part of your assessment is, again, looking at those typical early indicators that we talked about, whether there's a history of violence, correct?
That's correct.
A history of discipline.
That is correct.
Bullying behavior.
That is correct.
You look to see if there's a direct threat.
That is correct.
If those things are not apparent, if those things are not present, then it's just a student who drew a gun. Is that accurate?
That's pretty accurate, yes.
You were part of the meeting after Mr. Crumbley and his wife arrived. And let me go back a little bit. So you sat in on the meeting between Mr. Hopkins and Mr. Crumbley's son, correct?
That is correct.
If you know, that meeting occurred, lasted approximately 90 minutes?
I don't remember.
Okay. You left that meeting at some point.
Yes.
Then you came back once Mr. Crumbley and his wife arrived.
So I left the meeting to retrieve his belongings, the students' belongings, and returned back to the office and then left again until the parents arrived.
Okay. You entered Mr. Hopkins' office after Mr. Crumbley and his wife arrived in Mr. Hopkins' office.
That's correct.
You saw that Mr. Crumbley was seated next to his son,
Yes.
which was directly across the desk from Mr. Hopkins.
Yes.
It was your perception that Mr. Crumbley was showing care for his son,
Yes.
that he reassured his son that he can always talk to him.
Yes.
You mentioned something on direct with the prosecution about a journal,
Yes, I did.
and you seem to recall that Mr. Crumbley made reference to a journal.
He did, yes.
You don't recall Mr. Crumbley saying the one that you always keep with you?
I don't recall that, no.
He didn't say anything like the one that's in your backpack,
I don't recall.
specific colors,
I don't remember.
how long he's had it.
I don't remember.
There were no specifics about anything about a potential journal.
Not that I can recall.
So to your knowledge, you don't know if there was one journal or 15 journals. Is that fair?
I can't speak to that, no.
Right, you have no knowledge of that. Is that fair?
Yes.
After meeting with Mr. Crumbley and his wife, you felt that they were receptive of getting their son help, as was suggested by Mr. Hopkins.
Yes.
You and Sean Hopkins did not insist that it be done that day. Now, I'm going to clarify because I know that Mr. Hopkins indicated that he preferred that it would be done that day, but neither of you said, you need to take him today and you need to go get him help right now, and if you don't, there's going to be a problem.
What Mr. Hopkins had stated was that they needed to find him some counseling as soon as possible that day, if possible.
And that he was going
he would be following up within 48 hours to ensure there was something secured for the student.
And that was going to be my next question, that he was going to follow up in a couple of days, 48 hours.
Yes.
And in fact, you didn't feel in that meeting that Mr. Crumbley's son was in need of immediate care based on your education and training and perception and the knowledge that you had in that meeting.
I can't speak to that.
In no way did you feel that Mr. Crumbley was being neglectful of his son.
No, I did not.
You felt that Mr. Crumbley showed the appropriate level of emotion with his son in that meeting.
Objection is, he can't speculate as the appropriate level of emotion. He's the Dean of Students regarding Code of Conduct, November of 21. Speculation.
Was there anything odd about his interaction with his son?
I wouldn't say there was anything odd.
Okay.
You also didn't find it strange that Mr. Crumbley and his wife did not take their son home that day because there was no reason for him to go home that day. Is that correct?
As far as the discipline goes, no.
During the meeting, you said that you retrieved Mr. Crumbley's son's backpack from his classroom and brought it back to Mr. Hopkins' office.
That's correct.
You indicated this backpack was heavy.
Yes, such as every other student in the school.
And let me clarify, that day, you didn't say that today. That day, November 30th of 2021, you commented to a teacher that the backpack was heavy.
Yes, I made a joke at how easily she picked it up, and then when she handed it off to me, my arm dropped down. So it was more of a joke at how strong she was compared to myself.
And if you recall, at the time, the students weren't using their lockers,
They were not using their
so it was
lockers.
fairly common for a student's backpack to be heavy.
That's correct.
You didn't look in the backpack?
I did not know.
You didn't, and I think you said you didn't have reason to look in the
I
backpack.
didn't have reasonable suspicion, though.
You didn't ask Mr. Crumbley's son to look at his backpack?
I did not know.
You did not ask Mr. Crumbley or his wife to look in the backpack.
I did not know.
You didn't look yourself or ask anyone else to look because you didn't feel that there was a reason to look in the backpack. Is that fair?
There was nothing from our conversation or from anything that we had heard so far that would indicate it was enough to reach to that level, correct?
You've had numerous discussions about this case since November 30th of 2021.
Yes.
You've talked with various attorneys.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm not asking you about what your communications were with your own attorneys. I'm not asking about that. I'm just asking if you've met with attorneys.
I've met with many different attorneys.
You've met with the prosecutor's office?
Yes.
On more than one occasion?
Yes.
And some of those meetings with the prosecutor's office were to prepare for testimony?
Yes.
Some were to get more information about what occurred on November 30th of 2021?
One was yes.
You learned through some of those meetings that there was no indication that there was a handgun in Mr. Crumbley's son's backpack.
Can you restate that?
Sure. You learned through some of the meetings with the prosecutor's office that there was no indication that there was a handgun in Mr. Crumbley's son's backpack while he was in Mr. Hopkins' office.
Object to the form of the question.
Yeah, what do you mean? What do you mean? Can you restate that?
Yes. I will be more clear. Do you recall testifying in September
What are
of...
you referring to, counsel?
There was testimony in September 14th of 2022 that relates to this. If you'd like, we can approach to talk about it further.
I think we should.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Lehman.
Thank you, Your Honor. As you know, approximately 2 hours after the meeting, after this meeting with Mr. Hopkins, yourself, and Mr. Crumbley and his wife, Mr. Crumbley's son began the shooting.
Yes.
You saw the footage of the shooting.
I did, yes.
You were not aware that Mr. Crumbley's son was the shooter.
Initially.
At the time.
When I saw all of the footage?
No, let me go back. So at some point early on the day of the shooting, you saw footage of the shooting.
Yes.
And that was while you were in the office of the school.
On the phone with the 911 operator?
Yes. And at that point, the thought didn't cross your mind that the shooter may be Mr. Crumbley's son.
That's a fair statement, yes.
In fact, you didn't know that it was Mr. Crumbley's son until you were told that it was him after the shooting.
I believe as the video footage continued to play and we were still on the phone, it wasn't confirmed, but I had a pretty good idea that that's who it was.
Okay. Even looking back, after you know what Mr. Crumbley's son did 2 hours after that meeting, his behaviors did not show a pattern of what he was planning to do 2 hours later.
Based on the information I knew, no.
It's fair to say that you have years of experience with at-risk students.
Yes, that's correct.
Years of experience with behavioral, academic, attendance, issues of that nature.
Yes.
You have education and training about concerning things to look for in students.
Yes.
You knew that Mr. Crumbley's son was looking at bullets on his phone on November 29th of 2021.
Yes.
You knew that he had drawn a gun and some concerning words on his math assignment.
Yeah, that's correct.
You knew that he was at the shooting range with his mom the weekend before.
Yes, that's correct.
You confirmed that during the meeting with his parents, correct?
Yes.
You knew that he had experienced significant losses in the months before November 30th of 2021.
Yes,
You knew that Mr. Hopkins was recommending that his parents have him talk to a therapist that day if possible.
that's correct.
You knew that his backpack was heavy and commented about the weight of it to a teacher.
That's correct.
You knew that firearms were not uncommon in homes in Oxford.
That's correct.
You knew that students at the high school handled firearms and that it wasn't uncommon.
We're asked and answered now, Judge.
You knew,
Yeah, he answered that.
you knew that the shooter was going to stay in school that day.
At the end of the meeting?
Yes.
Yes,
Partly because he wanted to,
yes.
and partly because his parents had to go to work.
That's what I was told, yes.
And with all of this, all of the knowledge that you had on November 30th of 2021 at approximately 10:52 a.m., you did not feel that he was a threat to anyone, and you didn't feel that you had reasonable suspicion to look in his backpack.
No, because you have to remember, I knew very little of what we all know today. So when we're looking at the big picture today, I knew a fraction of what we all know now.
And we talked about this a little bit with Mr. Hopkins as well. We all know what happened at 12:51 on November 30th of 2021. But the information that you had at 10:52 a.m. or approximately 10:50 a.m. when that meeting ended, is the information that you were going on.
Yes, and that does not rise to the level of suspension or of a discipline, especially when you're considering mental health.
And it doesn't.
That supersedes any type of minor discipline or behavior violation.
So, and Mr. Hopkins talked about this a little bit. Looking in hindsight, there was more information.
Yes, we now know there's a lot more information.
You might look at things differently looking in hindsight.
I would 100% look at things
Right.
differently.
But the information that you had on that day, at that time, is what led you to make the decisions that you made and feel the way that you felt about the situation that you were presented with in Mr. Hopkins' office.
That's a fair statement, yes.
No further